Hello, chat. We're back in it today. We're gonna be hitting it. Turn on our SCP things, and we're gonna go.
The SCP Foundation
We're gonna start working on the novel today. Continue working, I should say.
You might remember SCP-726, a species of bowfly aptly named the reconstructive maggots, who recreated the bodies of other organisms through horrible reproduction methods. There's also SCP-2031, a colony of anomalous ants that would eat their victims' insides and burrow themselves in the bodies, puppeting them around and masquerading as the creature they just ate, even if it was a person. Today on SCP Explained, we're going to be talking about a new species of anomalous insect, SCP-378, nicknamed the Brainworm. Well, it's an anomaly only new to us. For the Foundation,
His gaze towards
SCP-378's
Nathaniel.
discovery and containment dates back to the days of the American Secure Containment Initiative. The American Secure Containment Initiative could be considered a predecessor to the SCP Foundation, active for the majority of the first half of the 20th century. While most of the stories go that the ASCI, alongside several other paranormal investigation organizations, eventually came together and formed the SCP Foundation in the early 50s, the reality is a lot murkier. As we all know, it's very hard to completely kill off an organization in the anomalous world. The secrecy and decentralization practically ensures that there's always going to be some stragglers left. And in the ASCI's case, that certainly seems to be the case. SCP-378's file indicates that by 1963, the ASCI was still around and kicking, though it was definitely living on borrowed time due to the rising prominence of the SCP Foundation. The two organizations, the growing Foundation and the dying ASCI, attempted to keep tabs on one another throughout the decade, but the Foundation's espionage programs proved to be more intensive and thorough. For whatever reason, the Foundation was always getting the best intel, whether it was beating the ASCI to the punch on newly discovered anomalies, gaining access to otherwise classified information only available in ASCI documents of the highest security clearances.
Why do you? It's already. It's almost too high.
Organization's detriments through diplomatic meetings that always seemed to work in the Foundation's favor. It was clear that the SCP Foundation was the new hotness, and the ASCI would have a lot of catching up to do if it wanted to remain relevant in this new post-World War II world. Unfortunately, we all know what happened. The majority of the ASCI was absorbed into the Foundation shortly after its formation, and the pieces that remained would fade into obscurity in the coming years. But why was the Foundation's intel so good? More funding? Better trained agents? Luck? The answer, if you're familiar with the Foundation's ways, shouldn't come as a surprise. Of course, there was always going to be more going on behind the scenes, and that's where SCP-378 comes in. SCP-378 is an arthropod, resembling an Amazonian giant centipede, specifically one in the larval stage. SCP-378 measures about 3 meters long, with a thickness of 233 kilograms, and it possesses otherwise ordinary biological features, well, about as normal as an anomaly contained by the SCP Foundation can get. On the dietary side, it eats like a normal centipede, consuming primarily other insects and lichen. On the reproductive side, things are a bit different. SCP-378 reproduces asexually, meaning that it's capable of generating offspring entirely through its own biological functions, which it excretes from its backside. A newly birthed instance, designated SCP-378-A, resembles a fully grown adult Amazonian giant centipede right from birth. But dissection of these baby peds suggests that this resemblance is superficial, as SCP-378-A's organ systems, beyond a primitive neural network, are entirely non-existent. These babies are essentially shell organisms, intended to be used by SCP-378, the host centipede, as remote drones. And that's how SCP-378 proves to be useful to the Foundation at large. You see, 378-A are endoparasites, meaning that they're organisms that live inside other organisms, like a tapeworm, but so much worse. SCP-378-A are used by SCP-378 to infect advanced primates, such as ourselves, but also a whole host of offshoots of humanity, such as the Homo ignotus, also known as SCP-655, and the Gigantopithecus sapiens, the common Sasquatch, which you might recognize as SCP-1000. SCP-378-A enters a host through an open orifice, and after infection, the entity will integrate itself with the host's nervous system through means that are poorly understood by the Foundation. This includes brain death of the host, and extending SCP-378's remote control through its offspring and into the host itself. Vital functions and sensory input remain unaffected, meaning that the host still retains some semblance of life function, just, without a brain or anything. They're not there. They're just puppets, but you'll never be able to tell. When you think of someone being puppeted by an anomalous parasite, you'd probably expect them to act a little weird. Maybe they don't speak right, or maybe they start slithering on the floor or eating only small lizards. But that's not the case with victims of SCP-378. No. Once its offspring have infected a suitable host, SCP-378 will actually do a pretty decent job of integrating its victims back into their respective social sphere. This means maintaining all of their previous relationships as best as possible, such as keeping their jobs, and otherwise fitting in and not standing above the crowd. You'd probably assume they prefer to keep a low profile, mainly infecting hosts in small towns and sleepy suburbs. But you'd be wrong there too. SCP-378 loves the big city, places with high population density, and a robust entertainment scene. We'll explain later, but SCP-378 differs from ordinary insects in that its base instinct isn't to just infect and reproduce, it's to have fun. And the way it entertains itself is by living the lives of people who otherwise live busy, engaging lives, filled with plenty of social interactivity and places to go. The Foundation
I got a
has yet to discover
centipede
the
in my
upper limit
head.
of SCP-378, as the centipede has managed to infect quite a number of hosts with its offspring, which it all seems to maintain simultaneously without issue. Upon interrogation of a host, SCP-378 confesses to the existence of 26 human hosts, 2 instances of Guatemalan black howler monkeys, and 3 instances of SCP-1000. Considering the complex social hierarchies of monkeys, it's unsurprising that SCP-378 infected a few of them just to try them out, on top of infecting a few Sasquatches in the form of SCP-1000, which SCP-378 conveniently is immune to the inherent anomalous effects of. But there is no question as to which species SCP-378 prefers. In fact, those other things it infected, according to the host, were only acquired during periods of heavy intoxication. See, the centipede enjoys getting a little tipsy too. You can't have that in the Amazon rainforest. As humanity is the dominant species on Earth, we're the ones with the shiniest toys for SCP-378 to play with. The most exciting lives, filled with more pointless interaction and labor than a bug would know what to do with. And that's what makes SCP-378 so intriguing for the Foundation. It's an intelligent parasite, whose only motivation is to keep society running as normal so it can slip behind a few pairs of human eyes and see what it's like in the world it would never get to otherwise live in. Some of you are already thinking it, but SCP-378 is the perfect anomaly for the Foundation to use against its foes and adversaries. And as we covered earlier, in the 1960s, the Foundation had a lot to prove, mainly against the American Secure Containment Initiative. The Foundation knew to classify SCP-378 as a Thaumiel class object. It was promptly contained in an underground terrarium filled with plenty of juicy lichen and ants for SCP-378 to feed on. Of course, there was also a decontamination chamber constructed adjacent to the regular containment chamber. Any personnel who would go in would obviously be at risk to an infection from SCP-378, and we're sure that living the crazy, exciting life of a Foundation agent would have satisfied the sociable bug. But the SCP Foundation wasn't taking any risks. As a result, anyone entering the chamber would have to wear full body protection, and if they were found to be infected during the decontamination process, they would be terminated. After discovery of SCP-378, the Foundation immediately saw the potential in utilizing the anomaly for espionage purposes. After all, it would be a perfect spy network, capable of fitting in and maintaining ordinary roles while also communicating with SCP-378, who would feed information to the Foundation through another host. The impeccable precision of SCP-378's maintenance of its host's social personas would make the entity almost impenetrable to sniff out in the field, even for trained agents who deal with the anomalous. SCP-378's initial psychological evaluation was performed by the well-known Foundation psychologist, Dr. Simon Glass. Dr. Glass found that SCP-378 was obviously unique among arthropods and possessed either human level of sapience, or at the very least, the ability to emulate its host's intellectual faculties. Regardless, the anomaly was intelligent, but a point of interest for Dr. Glass was SCP-378's relationship with its hosts. It maintained a constant, consistent sense of identity across multiple hosts. But interviews with SCP-378 revealed that it was fully aware that it was not those hosts in actuality. SCP-378 was essentially role-playing various human identities.
Well, this centipede sounds like a bro. What the fuck?
To figure out that the centipede enjoyed masquerading as its hosts. It pretty much spelled it out with giant letters. SCP-378's hosts rarely interact with or send information directly back to SCP-378 or fellow hosts, because SCP-378 is in full control at all times. This is literally just a game for SCP-378, a source of entertainment. And if one of those hosts came under duress or was at risk of being found out by those in its life, 378 could easily abandon the host persona, which it had no issues in doing. Dr. Glass found that the host behavior was largely unique to each instance, and extroverted personalities were a favorite for SCP-378. Hosts rarely isolate themselves, except to sleep or use the bathroom, and SCP-378 appeared to take equal enthusiasm in both stressful and pleasant situations. After all, this was all a big role-playing session for it. SCP-378 appreciated some excitement in the lives of its subjects. In a way, this was like an infinite
sneaking
source
around
of
back
entertainment. You could live as many
deals.
lives as you wanted at once, have almost no attachment to any consequences, because you're a bug who has no stake in the real world, and you get to experience things no other member of your species ever has or ever will. SCP-378 really is living the dream. Even to another human, this sounds pretty fun. We only get one life to live. SCP-378 gets to live as many as it wants. But Dr. Glass found another interesting fact about SCP-378. It was attached to a certain identity. Lisa Martin, a 33-year-old Mexican-American female employee at Digianatono's Pies, a pizza chain located in Staten Island, New York. Dr. Glass was a bit unsure as to why SCP-378 enjoyed Miss Martin so much, but it was clear from the way it talked about her that this was its favorite persona. And Dr. Glass could see why the more he studied Martin's routine. It was the perfect mixture of business, idleness, routine labor, and general engagement for SCP-378 to experience. Lisa Martin's routine was static. On every day except Saturday, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., Lisa Martin would show up to work at Digianatono's Pies. After she finished work, from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., Martin would engage in maintenance of one of 17 rooftop gardens across New York City. Of these gardens, Glass discovered that 13 are maintained by volunteer organizations, 12 of which Martin was not a part of. On Saturdays from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m., Martin alternated between socializing with a collection of friends and coworkers and playing piano for various high-end bars. On all days from 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., Martin would shower and then prepare for bed. She would sleep from 12 a.m. to 7 a.m., and in the morning she'd get back up and do it all over again. When you see a person's schedule laid out like this, everything seems a bit more routine and less exciting, huh? It's not an exciting life laid out on paper, but SCP-378 loved it, for whatever reasons. Attempts to interrupt Lisa Martin's routine were unilaterally met with unusual levels of hostility from the bug and its hosts, and in the event of Lisa Martin's death, SCP-378 would happily direct another host to assume her identity. Yeah, we're not sure either. Regardless, 378 had a hobby, many hobbies, but Lisa Martin was special. Dr. Glass's evaluation proved to be popular with the upper ranks of the Foundation, who, due to SCP-378's intelligence and awareness of human sentience, could prove to be useful to the overall mission of the Foundation. As we said before, in 1963, the Foundation had to contend with a number of powerful adjacent organizations, the Global Occult Coalition, with their destructive tendencies and the backing of the world governments, GRU Division P, the Soviet Union's Anomalous Research Military Unit, the remnants of the American Secure Containment Initiative, who, while not as prominent or as powerful as they used to be, still remained an organization capable of deterring the Foundation. As a result, the Foundation looked into applying SCP-378 through practical means. Dr. Glass's work importance could not be understated, but the prevailing theory was that SCP-378 did not understand the significance of social dynamics in regards to hierarchy and social capital. This could be observed in its strange defense of Lisa Martin. Several of SCP-378's hosts held positions of power, two of which, David Lockheed and Alfonso Leos, were even employed by anomalous organizations and beyond the reach of the Foundation's then capacity to contain. Even holding these powerful positions, SCP-378 displayed a willingness to sacrifice the hosts to defend, replace, or otherwise maintain Lisa Martin, its favorite host. It was here when the Foundation saw an opportunity. If they could use SCP-378's favoritism of Martin to get it to do what they wanted, their dream spy network had a chance of manifesting into reality. David Lockheed, one of SCP-378's hosts, was a low-level employee of the ASCI, but if the Foundation was able to persuade SCP-378, using Martin's safety as collateral, Lockheed could rise through the ranks of the organization into a position where the Foundation needed a puppet. Second, they realized that Martin herself could prove to be a useful asset. The Foundation was always looking for new ways to conduct reconnaissance, and pizza parlors were an ideal meeting spot and espionage center, if they could be kept from the public eye. Martin's place of employment would soon be converted from your average Staten Island pizza parlor to one of the Foundation's very own spicy crust pizza chains. See what they did there? Spicy crust pizza, SCP. They are so clever. Regardless, the use of SCP-378's anomalous abilities to defend Foundation operatives in the United States seemed like a useful prospect, and the idea was put to a vote by the Overseer Council. It passed, with only minor detraction, under the name of the Kraken Protocol. As a result, SCP-378's containment procedures were updated, and containment of the anomaly would be focused on three primary components. Its first host, SCP-378-1, was held in the Area 19 barracks of the SCP Foundation. -1 was employed as a maintenance technician with a low security clearance, and in the case of death, a brain-dead or comatose reserve personnel would be elected to replace it. SCP-378-1 served as the Foundation's primary means of communication with SCP-378. After all, they needed a channel to speak directly to the bug in charge, and -1 was their way of doing so. SCP-378-2 was David Lockheed, an average employee of the American Secure Containment Initiative, working in their clerical sector. Lockheed was tasked with sabotaging ASCI operations for the Foundation, as well as collecting information in the Foundation's interests. SCP-378-2 was a little more difficult to replace than the average SCP-378 host, and was required to follow a strict health and exercise regimen. If something were to happen to Lockheed, there's no telling if the Foundation would be able to replace him, and the chances of that happening were low. Lockheed was the perfect spy, with an established rapport with the ASCI going back at least a decade, and access to information the Foundation would use to outsmart the initiative at every turn. It shouldn't come as a surprise to you that the ASCI's days were numbered, and eventually, they closed their doors entirely. SCP-378-3 was Lisa Martin, who worked at Spicy Crust Pizza in Staten Island. Martin's purpose was to maintain a network for Foundation operatives in New York, and host a place where they could congregate and meet without issue. On top of that, Martin was still SCP-378's favorite persona, and the entire operation hinged on SCP-378 having Martin available to it. As a result, Lisa Martin would have to be replaced as soon as possible, if anything were to happen to her. And with that, the Kraken Protocol was in place. Each instant formed a part of the Foundation's information gathering campaign, and was outfitted with a tracking device and an audio recorder. Every week, embedded agents stationed near each host were to evaluate the health and integrity of them, and the equipment they had inside them. If this initial rollout was a success, the Foundation would continue to use SCP-378-A in further infiltration of its enemies, but the Foundation would have to see how things played out first. Less than 2 years later, Lockheed had retrieved significant information for the Foundation, and the Kraken Protocol proved to be a success. A new site, Site 56, located near prominent anomalous locations, was about to be constructed. SCP-378 seemed excited at the prospects of a change in scenery and more hosts to infiltrate, but there was also something the Foundation could never have expected. In an attempt to gain a new host for SCP-378 to control, the Foundation came across something disturbing. Their target was an agent of the FBI's Unusual Incident Unit. After drugging him and bringing him back to the Foundation in order to receive an SCP-378-A instance inside him, SCP-378 informed the Foundation that it couldn't establish a connection with the agent. The personnel were confused. The agent was still alive, and 378 never had any difficulty in connecting with hosts before. They did a number of tests on the agent and tried to figure out what went wrong. That's when the Foundation discovered that there was a different centipede inside the agent's head, where the SCP-378-A instance would typically be. It looked like the Foundation had a much bigger issue on their hand than they ever had realized. The year was 1861. Arthur du Plessis, one of the world's most renowned explorers and adventurers, hacked through the thick vines of the Amazon rainforest with a well-worn machete. He grunted and strained, his clothes heavy and skin slick.
We're gonna
with
skip this
sweat.
one, chat.
Take a brief moment to think back to
That
your
one's very
younger
boring.
years,
Just ants.
spending long, tiresome hours trapped in a
Just
classroom,
ants.
waiting to hear the noise of that
Ants are
final
boring.
bell of the day. That sound meant freedom, the end of another grueling 6 hours at your desk, and the chance to get back to the warm sanctuary of home. If you were lucky, you might not have had to go far to get back to the safety and security.
Is this a
of
new
being
reality?
in
No,
your
this is
house.
the conflict
Living
story.
close enough to the school would mean you could easily walk home when the day was through. But your
This is
classmates,
the conflict story.
well, they weren't all as lucky. Some of them had miles to travel, all the way across town even. Fortunately, though, the school bus would always be waiting
I'm just,
outside.
my
at the end
brain
of
is like
each
cutting a
day,
blank here.
waiting to take a
I don't
gaggle
know
of
why.
rowdy kids back home. And if you were one of those kids that had to take the bus, you'll know that the trip home after school was hardly a calm drive. Paper planes and spitballs firing from all directions, wads of chewing gum stuck to the undersides of seats, other kids all around you screaming and yelling at the top of their lungs. Still, it could
It's
be
weird.
worse,
It's weird that I'm
right?
drawing a blank.
No,
I usually know, just like
trust
never
us,
happens when I'm
it
just like
could be
writing.
much worse than you can ever imagine. What if one day the bus that picked you up from school wasn't a bus at all? What if instead it was SCP-2086? Picture this. One day you get put in detention at school. Maybe you were disrupting a class or were caught spraying graffiti on the outside wall of the gym. Whatever the reason, we're sure you'll think it is unfair that you got held back after school, after everyone else had already gone home. But you do your time until finally you're told you can leave. Problem is, your house is on the other side of town, and you've already missed the bus. You make your way off the campus, down the nearest street. Maybe there's a city bus you can catch that'll get you back home. As you stroll away from your school, you realize that the nearest bus stop, the first one on the route home, seems to be further away than you remember it being. Must be just the exhaustion of a long day getting the better of you, playing tricks on your mind. It's not like someone could move the bus stop, right? Finally reaching the stop, you notice lights coming down the street after a few moments of waiting quietly. A late bus, just like you hoped for. It pulls up to the next stop, the doors folding open to allow you on board. It's totally empty, save for the driver, but straight away you notice there's something odd about him. He seems drained of color. His movements are weird, more like a puppet on strings than an actual living, breathing human being. Now that you think about it, if it wasn't for the fact he was clearly moving, driving the bus, you might assume that he was a corpse. Then again, maybe he just had a long day too. Taking a seat, you try not to think about it and stare out of the window in boredom. You watch as the route takes you past stop after stop, all of them empty just like the bus itself. But then something unexpected happens. You've ridden the bus to and from school so many times before that you can't help but notice when, for some reason, it takes a wrong turn.
Dude, this is so
Looking
bad.
out the
I don't.
window,
Oh
you
my
know
god.
You aren't mistaken. The driver has changed direction. Instead of heading towards the nearest stop to home, he's taken the bus towards the furthest edge of town. Desperately, you try yelling at him, asking why he's taken the wrong turn, but the driver stays still, as if he can't even hear what you're saying. That's when you notice the smell. You didn't catch it before, but now it's all around you, filling the air inside the bus. It's almost like the scent of disinfectant, The bus now smells the same way a hospital does. But that's not all. The more you breathe it in, the more you feel yourself starting to get woozy, arms and legs getting heavier. Everything around you feels as if it's spinning uncontrollably. Out of the windows, you can just about make out the sight of a junkyard, blurring in and out of focus. It's meant to be abandoned, and yet you're sure you can see movement. Massive, indeterminate shapes shifting around in the dark. Finally, your vision goes dark and you fall unconscious onto the floor of the bus. Only, you were never on the bus to begin with. No. Although you didn't know it, you were prey to something that just looked like a bus. SCP-2086. And now that it's caught you, you'll never see the light of day again. Now, SCP-2086 doesn't just refer to a single creature, not by a long shot. It is the designation given to an entire species of arthropods. Think lobsters, crabs, and spiders, or insects like centipedes and millipedes, only much bigger. To the untrained eye, and depending on when you look, an instance of SCP-2086 will normally look like any ordinary public transport vehicle, of any make and model, or belonging to any company or transit authority. Usually, though, they look like regular old buses, at least while they're out foraging for food. When born, an SCP-2086 specimen will grow to full juvenile size within a week, usually weighing 200 kilograms or less. Full matured adult instances, however, can weigh approximately 17,000 kilograms. The adults are the ones that go out foraging, leaving the nest to collect food to then bring back to the juvenile SCP-2086s. And by food, we of course mean humans. While out on the roads, matured SCP-2086
bus
creatures
SCP?
are practically identical to
Not
the auto
Pog, I'm not
vehicles that
gonna lie.
form their bodies. But the materials that this disguise is made from, the steel, plastic, wood, and glass, they're all actually comprised of specialized chitin, the kind of outer shell you'd find on most arthropods. But underneath that outer shell, that's where you'll find the real horror. Within the main chamber, beneath the flooring of the bus's long inner portion, is stored the pulsing, beating heart of an SCP-2086 specimen. And we don't mean that in a metaphorical sense. If you were to lift up the floorboards of one of these bus-like creatures, you'd see its heart, along with other vital organs like the creature's brain and stomach. What's more, the figure in the front seat that you thought was a living, breathing bus driver actually isn't living or breathing. Not anymore. Preserved in a shell-like substance that the creature is able to produce, the driver is actually a human corpse, acting as a decoy for SCP-2086s. From within the bus body, fibrous appendages reach up into the corpse, almost
What's
like
the word?
thin hairs. The creature can then use the cadaver essentially as a puppet with a dead person's body.
With the
That's how an
Telltale, yeah.
SCP-2086 is able to a dramatically different result when it comes to SCP-2086. But if you thought bus creatures with internal organs under the floor and dead meat puppets in the driver's seat weren't creepy
With the
enough,
Telltale
there's
deep
still
black
much
skin.
more to SCP-2086s than meets the eye. For example, when they aren't out foraging, the adult creatures can unravel the roof of their bus-shaped outer shell. Underneath is a pair of wings, large enough and strong enough to carry their entire 7,000 kilos of weight off the ground and up into the air. As for eyes, the headlights at the front are, in actual fact, bioluminescent optical organs, allowing the creatures to see their prey even in the dark. Still not horrifying enough? Well, would knowing about their legs help? The wheels underneath an SCP-2086 specimen are also capable of unraveling, forming long gray or black legs like those of a spider. Yes, these are bus creatures with wings and multi-jointed legs. These legs aren't just big, clumsy appendages either. Compared with other arthropods, SCP-2086s are able to use their limbs to perform surprisingly intricate actions and finer levels of manipulations. For instance, a number of specimens have been observed in the wild by the SCP Foundation building shelters out of any materials that they can find near their nesting ground. And where do they normally nest? Wherever there's plenty of scrap metal and hardly any people to notice them. Junkyards are the preferred habitats of SCP-2086s, and where they will normally establish their colonies. While the juveniles remain within the confines of the colony, adult SCP-2086 specimens will leave to collect humans. Although on occasion, the younger specimens have been known to travel out from their nest and rearrange or relocate signposts for bus stops. They then place them in a route that leads them back towards their nesting ground. It's something worth remembering if your nearest bus stop ever seems to be a little further away from the school than usual. Afterward, the older specimens will travel along the route laid out by the juvenile SCP-2086s, picking up any human passengers that they find waiting at the relocated bus stops. They have to choose their moments wisely, with people boarding and disembarking from the bus usually every few stops. Once an SCP-2086 has as many humans on board as it can carry, with the certainty it won't lose any at the upcoming stop, it secretes a substance similar to chloroform. This fills the inner chamber of the bus, causing that noxious smell, like hospital disinfectant. The chloroform-like substance incapacitates all the passengers on board, rendering them unconscious and readying them to be taken back to the local SCP-2086 colony. Once the adult SCP-2086 has arrived at the junkyard, the juveniles will descend on it. Given their much smaller size, they will climb inside the mature specimen and forcibly remove each and every human passenger it is carrying within. Then comes the truly nasty part, feeding time. Each juvenile SCP-2086 will force their captive human through an orifice that is located under the front hood of their vehicle's shell. This sphincter, a circular formation of muscle that can expand and contract to perform a bodily function, is connected to where the steering wheel is found on an adult SCP-2086. The younger creatures will push their human prey through the sphincter, consuming them. Once this has occurred, those hairy appendages in the driver's seat will then latch onto the body of the now dead human, piercing through their skin, winding up and around their bones. These are the same fibrous hairs used to puppet the deceased corpse and use it to lure others aboard the bus. But these appendages have another function. They're feeding tubes. They will drain every last drop of blood from the SCP-2086's prey until the body is little more than a husk, at which point the tubes inject a saline solution directly into the cadaver. Afterwards, the inside of the bus fills with that same substance that preserves the corpse, and the process is complete. As horrifying as these creatures are, one of the few upsides of SCP-2086s is that they don't live very long. Female specimens will reproduce after 8 days and produce 20 offspring after this point. Each of these newborns reaches full maturity and size in about a week. On average, SCP-2086s live for 12 to 15 days. Another net positive is, because of their short lifespans, an SCP-2086 specimen doesn't need to feed on a human more than once, as the nutrients it absorbs as a juvenile are enough to sustain it through adulthood. Once it has matured, an SCP-2086 will go out into the nearest city or town to forage for humans, providing food to the next generation. And so the cycle continues. In the future, rather than taking the bus, maybe it's safer to walk. It might mean the difference between you making it home or becoming food. Now and again, you might stumble across an entry in the SCP Foundation archive that is far more than meets the eye. As you are probably already aware, sometimes the Foundation's numerical SCP designations can be referencing an entity, a creature, an object, a location, or even a combination of linked anomalies all sharing a version of the same number. Such is partially the case with SCP-4812. In this instance, the designation number 4812 doesn't refer to one singular item or entity. Instead, it is more of a collective designation, an umbrella term for 3 distinct, separate, but connected anomalies. We've got a lot of ground to cover here, so without further
this one, one thing I really don't like about this compilation stuff is that
our disgusting tale of anomalous nastiness
they have these compilations, but they
back in the 1990s.
They just like, what's the word? They keep reusing the same ones.
Main sequence star. Unlike the millions of Baron
Fox
literary
I just don't want to listen to the same one like 8
this one
times.
is in what scientists call the Goldilocks zone, the area around a star believed to be most capable of sustaining life. And life does more than just survive on this world. It thrives. The distant world is home to a mix of animal and plant life, including a large technologically advanced civilization of humans.
That's been a
Other
little
than the
more.
Earth, this is the most complex ecosystem the SCP Foundation is aware of, and it may be the greatest threat to life on Earth in the universe. This is SCP-3003, a Keter-class object with one of the most ominous nicknames in the entire Foundation database, the End of History. Research into this world, which is located roughly 208 light-years from Earth, revealed many similarities to our own world. It is only 3% heavier than Earth, rotates in 30 hours, and orbits its sun at a similar distance to our own planet. The temperatures are similar, and they are temperate enough that the majority of the planet's landmass is able to support large numbers of life forms. While few species found on SCP-3003 are identical to those on Earth, many are surprisingly similar. But it's 3 of these organisms specifically that combine to create an existential threat to our own world. SCP-3003-1 is a small beetle-like creature known as Mars by the planet's human population. While they grow to only 3 centimeters in length at most, they have a strong ability to defend themselves. In addition to their hard carapace, they can shoot a spider silk-like substance from their abdomen and coat themselves with acidic liquid which makes them impossible for predators to eat. They spend most of their time swarming and feeding on plants, and can live 15 years in the wild. They're largely harmless to the planet's humans. That is, until an invisible enemy enters the picture. SCP-3003-2 is a single-celled amoeba-like creature that has evolved to be completely dependent on other beings like the Mars. In other words, it's a parasite, and SCP-3003-1 is essential to its life cycle. After it makes contact with the Mars and infects them, though, it doesn't stick around. Rather, it starts to transform the beetles into vicious parasites themselves, causing them to grow a long, pointed stinger on their head. This stinger can paralyze its target, allowing the Mars to inject whatever it stung with the population of SCP-3003-2 lurking inside of it. And these beetles that have been taken over only have one target. SCP-3003-3 entities are humans, 30 billion of them, to be precise. The human civilization of SCP-3003 is far larger than our own, and studies have indicated that they're genetically identical and could even produce viable offspring with the humans on Earth, and they are the primary target of the infection of SCP-3003-1 and 2. When attacked by the infected Mars, the beetle creates a hole and enters into the human's body before sealing the hole with its silk material. Once inside, it can live up to 3 years inside the human, during which time the human is fundamentally transformed. Once they've been infected, the SCP-3003-3 human becomes obsessed with spreading the Mars and develops a pleasure response to being in its presence. They maintain their intelligence and become hyper-rational, able to evaluate information quickly and effectively without any influence of emotions. While the capacity for emotions remains, these humans rarely express them and almost never act on them. They have one primary function: to spread the infection further. It sounds like the beginning of an alien invasion, but the invasion already happened. The war is over, and the humans of the planet orbiting HIP 56948 have lost. The infection is not growing. It's already complete. SCP-3003 has a population of 30 billion humans, and every single one is host to SCP-3003-1 parasites. This happened centuries ago, and the entire society has since been reshaped to accommodate these parasitic creatures and to make the human population more hospitable to them. While these humans are identical to those on Earth, they lack its genetic diversity. The humans of SCP-3003 have been selectively bred to make ideal hosts, complete with larger bodies, more fat tissue, higher pain tolerance, and less susceptibility to diseases. But the society has not degraded due to the infection, quite the opposite. The SCP-3003-3 population has become a hive mind of sorts, working together towards a single purpose. As such, these humans have evolved to be far more united than humans on Earth. They all speak a single language similar to Dutch, with no other languages still active. All humans belong to the same culture, and research has indicated this is about 500 years old. Before the infection, they were a humble society that had over 7,000 different cultures and mainly engaged in trading. None of them exist anymore, and they aren't the only thing that's gone. SCP-3003 lacks Earth's genetic diversity in animal and plant life. That's because in the early wave of SCP-3003-1 infections, the newly infected humans targeted any species that preyed on the Mars. These mass extinctions created famines and other ecological catastrophes, and led to a massive change in the way the humans of SCP-3003 live. The vast majority now live in carefully planned cities, built in the safe and temperate regions of the planet. These cities are mostly enclosed and are used for industry and food growth. They are also extremely tightly built, so much so that SCP personnel reported feeling claustrophobic. Many surfaces of the cities are coated with a material that closely resembles the feel of SCP-3003-1, the Mars beetle. The infected are so fixated on the pleasure that being around these beetles gives them that they use this as a form of entertainment. The remaining members of this society live in rural areas, in small, carefully planned communities dedicated to farming, mining, or manufacturing. These small pods are even more structured than the cities. Children in this world are raised communally by large groups of workers specializing in health and education. They are infected quickly, at only a little over a year old, which is as soon as their supervisors are convinced they're physically capable. Once they are infected and their mindsets converted to the interests of the Mars, the children are quickly tested to determine their ideal occupation before being steered into what they will do for the rest of their life, where, like everything else on SCP-3003, their day-to-day life will be highly structured. Adults typically spend 10 hours a day at work, with the rest being spent engaging in basic activities like eating, sleeping, attending educational classes, and engaging in entertainment. But the entertainment all revolves around the Society's obsession with SCP-3003.
It doesn't sound too bad, right?
Listen to recordings of the Beatles.
Besides the Beatles shit,
Visit the enclosures where the Beatles
it sounds like they just kind of
or
made a
obsessively
better
touch
world.
The distinctive lumps that the parasite cause on their hosts. Everyone fits in on SCP-3003. There is no other option. Any sign of divergence from one's job.
I mean, if the Beatles wasn't a thing, this is just a better world. It's just a flat, better world.
Make sure that the parasitic infestation isn't becoming too harmful. Anyone who doesn't conform to the social standards is restrained by local members of the hive mind and brought in for observation. When someone becomes too old or sick to work for society and act as a host for the Mars, their usefulness is at an end, and they are used for organ harvesting and experimentation. In the Society of SCP-3003,
yeah, I mean, I literally don't see a downside besides bug.
Is the value it can bring to the hive mind. There's one area of SCP-3003's
There has to be something fucked up, like they're evolving or something.
Greater concern to the Foundation, though. Their technology. SCP-3003-3 works as one, and that has allowed it to develop technology far beyond that of what we have on Earth. Their planet is run almost entirely on wind, solar, and tidal power, with a small amount also coming from geothermal and nuclear. Their computers have enough power to produce data that makes foolproof recommendations for public policy, and their artificial intelligence systems are far beyond anything the Foundation has developed. Their crops have been genetically modified to have ideal hardiness and nutritional value, and they routinely experiment on their own DNA for selective breeding purposes. The planet has launched.
I guess selective breeding is also kind of bad, in a way.
Their solar system, but it's one invention in particular that has brought this strange planet to the Foundation's attention. SCP-3003-4 is a massive facility on SCP-3003 with one purpose: to open wormholes that can transport members of the planet to any other point in space. Each use of this device uses up more energy than Earth uses in a full year, and the device seems to have been created with one goal in mind: to transport representatives to other planets that can expand their parasitic civilization to. The desire to spread the infection of the Mars is a single-minded obsession for the citizens of SCP-3003, and they now have their sights set on Earth. Unlike most dangerous specimens, SCP-3003 and its native species were not discovered in the wild. Rather, it made contact directly with the Earth through its wormhole generator, sending ambassadors who came bearing the news of their gospel of a better, unified way of life that would be achieved by joining their growing empire. They could have passed for missionaries, but what they were preaching was infection with a parasitic mutated beetle. The SCP Foundation was not prepared for this first contact, and collected all the evidence they could on this strange new society. They quickly came up with one conclusion: SCP-3003 was larger, more powerful, and more advanced than anything on Earth, even the SCP Foundation. With no other option available for containing the threat, the Foundation took the only approach they could, making peaceful contact with the ambassadors and making them think Earth was interested in what they were offering. As long as the representatives of SCP-3003 think they are involved in peaceful negotiations for how to introduce the Mars to Earth, they are ready to cooperate and agree to some of the Foundation's terms. This has given the Foundation the opportunity to study the society and identify some potentially exploitable weak points. And they found one in particular that may give humans a chance for survival. That weakness? The representatives of SCP-3003-3 do not know how to lie. Once they're converted to host the Mars, everything they do serves a common purpose and is shared with every other member of their hive-like society. There is no need to lie and no purpose to it in their society. And as such, they can be deceived far more easily than most humans. That gives the SCP Foundation the chance to stall them and fool them into thinking Earth is planning for integration at its own pace. But even the residents of this strange civilization's patience may have its limits. The representatives seem cooperative at first, agreeing to many concessions the Foundation requested, including carefully regulating where they entered Earth and making the Foundation their first point of contact for their Earth Contact and Research Committee. This allows the Foundation to ensure no invasive species makes their entry onto Earth unknown. Because the civilization is unable to lie, the Foundation has convinced them that Earth is contaminated and unable to host the Mars, with the species becoming sterile when introduced. The representatives seem to believe this and believe they are working on a solution with Earth. But some members of SCP-3003-3 may be becoming more aggressive. It was after a meeting with a representative of SCP-3003 that Foundation researcher Dr. Shaw entered an elevator with the alien. Suddenly, the Mars host became enraged, tearing the control panel out of the wall and stopping the elevator. Dr. Shaw was terrified, but the representative simply said it wanted some alone time. The SCP-3003-3 representative started speaking, but it didn't seem to speak like the other members. It was intense and intimidating, and most worrying. It referred to taking over a two-legged species over 500 years ago. It wasn't the human speaking, but neither was it the Mars. No, this was the single-cell organism that had puppeteered both them and the Mars. Unlike the humans of SCP-3003, it wasn't fooled by the Foundation's subterfuge. It knew they were resisting, and it didn't believe the story about the planet being inhospitable to the Mars. It wanted the Earth to surrender and join the hive mind, and it argued Earth would be better for it. No more war, no more conflict, no more hate, no more poverty. All it would take was the complete surrender of everyone on Earth's free will, and it made clear that it would win. It would be the last thing, the only thing left in the universe, and everyone would join it one way or another. It was clear that the threat of SCP-3003 was more pressing than thought, which posed a question. How do you contain an entire planet? The decision to classify SCP-3003 as Keter wasn't hard, but none of the Foundation's other tactics they'd used in the past would apply here. Investigation into the capabilities of the planet made clear that if a war was to break out between the two planets, it would end swiftly and decisively in favor of SCP-3003. If the SCP-3003-2 living inside the bloodstream of the planet's humans were aware of the Foundation's deceptions, they did not seem to be letting the humans of their planet in on this, so the deception would hold for now. But SCP-3003 was moving fast as well, and soon it might be too late to contain it. Two projects in particular concern the Foundation. One is a genetic tampering experiment to make SCP-3003-3 more hospitable to their purpose. It would add artificial genes to their human hosts, making them consume less resources, becoming immune to common pathogens, and making them able to host 10 times as many Mars inside their bodies. These genes would turn the infected humans into their own new species. They are working on traveling to and terraforming planets in other star systems, which would make them capable of spreading virtually anywhere, and at that point, impossible to contain. But the Foundation has some last-ditch plans in motion to stop this. In addition to continuing their disinformation campaign and the ongoing research into samples of the Mars and the single-cell being that mutates them, the Foundation is preparing for the worst-case scenario too. They are spreading disinformation among scientists to ensure no additional contact is made with elements outside the SCP Foundation, and the O5 Council has authorized studies into how to eliminate this threat permanently. But the Foundation will only have one chance to do so. and any attempt will need to involve the elimination of their wormhole device to keep them from escaping, because even one specimen escaping could mean infestation of another world, and eventually, the threat would begin anew. But for now, the Foundation has not deemed any plans for an attack to neutralize SCP-3003 either practical or likely to succeed, which means the Foundation is left focusing on maintaining stable relations with SCP-3003-3.
So
they continue to try and convince them.
So the bacteria knows something's up.
And let's hope they succeed in this task.
But the beetles and the humans don't know what's up.
This is the only thing we have standing between us and the end of history.
So
ask anyone that has been through it, and they'll all tell you that moving home is maybe one of the most stressful things that a normal person can ever experience.
Yeah, so it's literally just okay, it's a really cool concept. I like that a lot. Why doesn't the bacteria just say, hey, guys, other two people here, they're fucking with you? I don't know. It's interesting. But I think the fact that the bacteria has its own mind kind of like lessens the grip on it, because it had me for a while on it where it was like, yeah, they're fucking with it. They can't lie, so it takes everything as truth because there's no point to lie. But if the bacteria knows that it's lying, that the humans are lying, or that the SCP Foundation's lying, wouldn't it be in the best interest of their goal of population to tell everybody else? I don't know. But yeah, honestly, overall, if the bugs weren't trying to like breed people out of existence, not a bad deal. Maybe take the bugs out.
Right from the start. The moment you talk to a realtor about being interested in selling your current house and buying another,
not bad.
Everything goes downhill from there. After that moment, an avalanche of things comes hurtling towards you. Finding a place you like.
So it's called Netflix and Kill.
People look around your house, waiting for them to make a counteroffer, exchanging contracts, and that's before you even have thought about packing. And as Milo had learned, doing all of that on your own only makes the stress of moving feel all the more potent. But he had finally made it. After a constant back and forth with his realtor, the time had come for him to pack up all of his worldly possessions and relocate to a brand new place to call home. He had felt it was long overdue for him to get a change of scenery, and luckily, just the right place had come onto the market to answer that call. It was a pretty big house, bigger than Milo's previous home, but considerably cheaper. In fact, he thought it had been significantly undervalued. The house had an almost Victorian-era feel to it, all beautifully carved and varnished woodwork and creaky old floorboards, but in more of an elegant, refined sort of way, rather than a creepier one. That's not to say Milo's new place wasn't without its more unsettling elements. Aside from being big, spacious, and easy to imagine as being haunted, the creepiest thing about the house, aside from its frighteningly low price, was the story of what happened to the previous owners. Obviously, you know that legally we have to disclose whether or not anyone died on this property, the realtor had explained, wearing a forced grin as she showed Milo around the house. Hearing that sentence, he could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Someone died here? He asked in disbelief. No, of course not, sir. The realtor instantly walked back her statement, less in an effort to ease her client's nerves, but more to ensure that she still closed the deal and earned her commission bonus. Then why the hell would you start a sentence like that? Milo asked. We just have to give full disclosure, but I assure you, the previous residents didn't die on the grounds of this house. She gave that fake smile again. It was pretty ineffectual at reassuring him. So, what happened to the last owner? Well, it's a bit of a mystery, to be honest. A local legend, if you like. But hey, that gives the place more flavor.
I hate this realtor.
History, right? Think of what
I hate this fucking I'm gonna be honest with you, I fucking hate this realtor. If I'm sitting there and this realtor comes up to me and tells me, dude, if I could get a nice cheap house, I'm not asking any questions. If my realtor's gonna come to me and go, yeah. So like nobody died on here, but like here's the deep dark story of how they died off the property. Like shut the fuck up. I'm not asking you for this. I'm asking for this goosebump story. What the fuck?
The realtor ended
Just tell me what
his
happened.
sentence with a forced snorting laugh, but reined it back in when she realized Milo wasn't laughing with her.
The door slowly creaked
As
open.
far as I know,
Tuesday
there used to be an
afternoon.
older couple living here, the Shaws. They were apparently very quiet, reclusive, kept to themselves a lot. I'm sure you know the type. Milo couldn't help but notice she shot him a look as she said that part, as if she was silently passing judgment on the fact he was planning on moving in alone. But they used to spend a lot of time tending the garden out front, so their neighbors would see them pretty frequently, which meant they were all okay and no one had any bad mishaps in the house. You know how old folks can be, such a worry when they get to that age. Yeah, totally, Milo interjected, aware the realtor was stalling. He repeated, "So, what actually happened to them?" "Well, that's the thing," she shrugged. "Nobody knows the full story. One day, the neighbors across the street noticed they hadn't seen Mr. and Mrs. Shaw for quite a while, so naturally they came on over here to see if they were in, and the last thing they wanted was to assume everything was hunky-dory here.
Is it really quiet?
I'm sorry, right? But
it's blaring in my ears, and it's on the playback thing. It's pretty high. It's actually almost as high as I am. I'm at about I can help it, but worried it's gonna drown me out.
once they got inside, they couldn't find either of them. Mr. and Mrs. Shaw were just gone, vanished without a trace. Most people on the street thought they had just sold the place, kept it quiet and moved away, retired to somewhere nice and exotic. "Oh, well, that sounds nice, I suppose," Milo replied, relieved to hear that there hadn't been any brutal unsolved murders in the house, and that it most likely wasn't haunted. "That's just what the neighbors think anyway," the realtor continued. "Of course, they hadn't sold the house, they'd just left it. When my firm came in to repossess the place, it had all their belongings in it. Some might even still be laying around here. Anyway, did you want to have a look at that contract?" Well, strictly speaking, Milo was the only human living in his new house. He was never fully alone. He had arrived with his two closest friends, a pair of pets he had adopted while living in his old house. One was a hamster by the name of Donut, named after his round little body, and the golden brown shade of his fur had reminded Milo of the glazed sugary baked treat. The other was Pixel, a bearded dragon with a pattern on his scales that resembled some kind of mosaic art. The first order of business, Milo had decided, was before even unpacking, he needed to make sure his scaly and furry friends each had a suitable place to stay and that he got them fed. Little did he realize, there was something else living in the house with them, something that was far bigger and was getting much hungrier than either of his pets would.
YouTube is good though.
House, Milo stumbled across a few boxes that he hadn't brought with him. Like the realtor had said, the Shaws still had some of their possessions left lying around the place. Most of it was useless to Milo. Old man's clothes, or a set of knitting needles and rolls of colorful thread. It was those particular clues that seemed to imply Mrs. Shaw had a lot of free time on her hands, and maybe took up knitting as a hobby during retirement. Of course, the bigger clue was the huge handmade blanket that Milo found draped over some of the remaining boxes in the attic. He wasn't exactly well versed in knitwear, but he could appreciate the craft behind this soft blanket. It clearly had a lot of time and effort put into making it, painstakingly knitting each and every individual thread, looping it around a pair of steel needles, and eventually, after hours of wearing out shaking, bony fingers...
Yeah, it is extremely loud. It's as loud as I am. It's actually louder than me.
Nice. Even though the idea of sitting and knitting a blanket might have been one of the most boring uses of time Milo could imagine, he still had to admit he was surprised that the Shaws had left this particular piece of bedding behind. It seemed like it would be pretty comfy to sleep under, and might help keep a person warm at night now that the colder seasons were approaching. What's more was that the blanket was clean, almost like it had been freshly washed. There was no old person smell on it, no dirt or discoloration, not a stain. And it hadn't even accumulated any dust in its fibers. In fact, he noticed that there was hardly any dust at all up in the attic, despite the house being empty for so long. He assumed the realtors had hired someone as a caretaker while they found a buyer for the place, and they had kept the place clean. After all, what other conclusion could they have possibly drawn? It's not as if something had eaten all the dust. That would be absurd. He'd have a sort through of the Shaw's leftovers later, maybe sell some of it off at a local yard sale or give it to a thrift store. But that blanket might come in handy when it started snowing, so Milo had half a mind to keep it. Now, part of what makes moving home such a stressful life experience isn't just all the logistical and administrative parts of the process. It's only made worse by the fact that it takes forever to move into a new house fully. That's the part everyone always forgets about. The months after a move, when you're forced to live amongst towers of cardboard boxes.
It's there too? What do you mean?
Deep within them.
What do you mean?
You can never remember which crate anything is in when you urgently need it. So realizing it would take him much longer to unpack all of his things, Milo set about making sure he had everything that Donut and Pixel would need already to hand. The latter of his two pets, the bearded dragon, usually spent most of his days in a spacious glass tank. Milo didn't love the idea of keeping either of his two best buds so confined, but Pixel never went very far anyway.
I'm blowing my eardrums out right now. You better appreciate it.
Still for most of the day. Donut, on the other hand, was much more of a free spirit. The tiny brown hamster physically could not stay still, and most days seemed to be filled with more energy than Milo was. As a result, he let the little guy roll about inside a little plastic ball all day long, until his little hamster feet gave out. And now Donut had much more space to zip
this viewers on stream, boo. So guess what, fucker? Thank you for the free follow. Go fuck yourself and get banned. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
The realtors had pulled a bit of
fun in Bandland.
Despite the absolute steal of a price that Milo had been offered,
bye-bye.
It became clear that the unknown fate of the previous residents wasn't the only detail about the house that had been conveniently kept hidden. The place was in dire need of repair, with a lot of the old woodwork rapidly rotting away. If left unchecked, parts of the house could collapse and come apart at the seams. To make matters worse, the boiler was an ancient iron monstrosity that was barely able to produce warm water, which would quickly become an even bigger problem when the weather started to get colder. Then, to top off the trifecta of unforeseen issues and teething problems with his new place, Milo couldn't sleep. It was to be expected. After all, the house was old, worn out, and had definitely seen better days. There were bound to be a few noises, the odd creak coming from upstairs when Milo and his two pets were all downstairs, the tapping of branches against windows blowing in the wind outside. But for some reason, every audible disturbance that emanated from some hidden corner of the building only seemed to get 1,000 times louder when the sun went down. At nighttime, every squeaky floorboard or random noise of the house settling was nearly deafening, enough to pull Milo right out of what little restless sleep he was getting. The worst part about it was, though he couldn't help it, it made him feel unwelcome, as if Mr. and Mrs. Shaw were angered that he had moved in.
And Milo really gaslighting his house, saying it's his reason he can't sleep, pretty much.
One or both of the old couple creeping through the corridors, coming to reclaim their home and remove Milo from the premises. One night the noises started invading what little sleep Milo did manage to get, spilling into his dream and causing them to devolve into unsettling nightmares. There was an old photograph in a frame that he had come across in the personal effects left behind by the Shaws, showing the pair of them staring disapprovingly out of the image at him. Now, thanks to the creaking wooden structure of the house and the sounds it made at night, Milo was seeing the old couple in every bad dream he had. Both their faces were locked in those same still, frozen expressions of contempt as they tried to exorcise him like an interloper on their property. That was the final nail in the coffin that made Milo realize he needed to look at other options. Surely there had to be some way to induce a deep enough sleep so that the sounds the house was making weren't keeping.
Get a fucking white noise generator. Are you fucking with me, Milo? Are you stupid?
Doctor, arranging a consultation for later.
You're gonna go straight to drugs and not just white noise?
Something nudged against his foot. It was Donut, having rolled through the maze of cardboard boxes still filling the house. Milo took one look at the little brown furred hamster, then the crates that still littered the place. Grabbing the leftover items that the Shaws had forgotten to take with them before they vanished, Milo moved those boxes out into the shed. He knew he was probably reaching, that it was hard likely to make even the slightest difference to his sleeping, but maybe keeping their stuff away from him would keep the old couple out of his head. The only thing he kept in the house was the blanket. There was no use letting it go to waste, especially knowing that the boiler was on the blink and it would be cold soon. He rolled it up and left it on his bed, leaving his more mobile pet in the same room before heading out to see the doctor.
Oh, that hamster's fucking dead.
Back, a bottle of prescription sleeping pills in his pocket, he couldn't help but notice his room seemed different. The blanket looked like it had fallen off the bed and onto the floor for one. But more worryingly, Donut's plastic travel ball had been split open, laying in pieces on the ground, with its furry little occupant nowhere to be seen. Over the next few hours, Milo searched every corner of the house, calling out to his hamster, trying to lure it back with more morsels of food. But Donut didn't seem to be anywhere.
Just leave it in the
He
fucking
wasn't even
cage.
underneath the knitted blanket. Still, there was no sign. As worry set in, Milo hurriedly checked Pixel's cage to see if he was gone too, but the lizard was relaxing, as lethargic as ever, completely unfazed by what was going on. It certainly seemed that when it rained, it really poured in his new house. Just as he was searching for his missing hamster, Milo heard a new, horrible sound echo through the corridor.
Okay, I understand why using a table after previous owners, but like the blanket, I don't. Yeah, that's weird to me.
But it was more the inconvenience that
That's weird that he's gonna use a blanket and just cuddle it. Not, he didn't even wash it. Like, he says it's washed, but just like wash it again.
House's boiler burst. Spending the afternoon into the evening, failing to
Also, if a
track down
boiler
the missing
explodes,
pets
your house is
and
done.
stopping the huge iron cast
Your house is
boiler from
gone.
flooding the basement wasn't exactly what Milo had in mind for fun activities to do when he got home. Going to bed frustrated made it as hard to sleep as all the nightly cacophony of creaking floorboards and branches raking against the windows. He tapped out 2 of the pills the doctor had prescribed him, knocking them back with a sharp motion of his head and a swig of cold water before laying back in bed. As night had fallen, the temperature also had plummeted too. Not having a boiler to heat his room meant that Milo couldn't stop himself from shivering in the cold, his breath forming clouds in front of his face. He reached for the knitted blanket and threw it over himself, curling up underneath it to try and provide an extra layer of warmth to protect himself from the gnawing cold. The pills did as they were meant to, helping Milo to quickly sleep into a much deeper sleep than he had experienced in a while. Although it didn't seem to help the nightmares, Mr. and Mrs. Shaw came back again. This time they had Milo's arms and legs tied up. With their matching disapproving faces, the elderly couple threw something over their helpless victim and tried to smother him to death. For a dream, it felt so intense, so real. Milo could feel a heavy weight on top of his body as he slept. In fact, it felt like it was all around him, engulfing and crushing the life out of him from all sides. But it was the feeling of something wet against his arm, the sensation of liquid against his skin, and the numbness where his hand should be were what finally pulled him out of the dream and into the nightmare. Through the dark and his cloudy vision, Milo could see a wide, gaping maw filled with teeth. The feeling of being crushed was still surrounding him, and despite kicking his legs and trying to free himself from confinement, it didn't stop squeezing him tighter. His panic was already making it harder to catch his breath, but now he could barely fill his lungs enough to scream for help. Not that anyone was around to hear him, but it was the sight of his arm that chilled Milo's blood. It wasn't there anymore. Part of it, just above the elbow, was just gone. His hand, fingers, every internal bone and muscle had been reduced to a bloody mess, a slurry of red melting and coming
Was the
apart.
blanket's
It was
carnivorous, I
running,
think.
little more than a liquid resembling the consistency of sand when it's underwater and becomes sludge. Most of his flesh was liquefied, going further up his arm, and as the blanket pulled its prey into its mouth, until Milo was no more, not a trace of him left, just like the previous owners. Little did Milo, or the Shaws and Donut before him, know, but he'd been the victim of a creature that was part of a rather unique species. While they will often vary in size, shape, pattern, and other aspects of their appearance, SCP-799 always seemed to be ordinary items of knitted bedwear, at least at first. They retain heat like a normal blanket would, and are soft to the touch, and for the most part, don't seem directly harmful. And usually, they aren't. SCP-799s are incapable of much movement, instead laying still a lot of time. Not unlike a certain bearded dragon that just lost its owner. They also don't seem to require much in the way of food, extracting what little nutrition they do need by drawing in household dust. A lot of the organic matter in dust is comprised of dead and discarded human hair and skin cells, so this makes sense.
Why to
This
eat 'em?
feeding is all done through filtered mouths in the fibers. However, this changes if an SCP-799 blanket is forced to go on a long time without food. While they possess this biological trait themselves, SCP-799 don't seem to regard cold-blooded animals to be the source of food. In fact, they don't even seem to be able to detect other creatures with cold blood, such as reptiles. Instead, SCP-799 will metamorphose into a more predatory form, in order to consume any warm-blooded mammal or human being it encounters, transforming its feeding orifices and digestive tract into a singular mouth lined with several rows of sharp, pointed teeth. From there, it will wrap up the largest warm-blooded animal it can find, whether that be a hamster or a grown man, and will tear off parts of its prey, reducing them to little more than a thin slurry as it digests their body mass to feed itself. So if you move into a new house and come across an
This
old
all
dead
would have been
blanket,
perfectly
maybe consider
avoided
throwing
if he
it
just
out.
washed the
If
fucking
you
blanket
want to live.
instead of just
There's
slept
been
in it like a
strange
weirdo.
phenomenon
Because it would have drowned it.
central
He would have
Germany.
drowned it.
While the true extent of
Milo,
its
you're a
influence
fucking idiot.
is
You
still
deserve to die.
unknown, it seems to have been going on for quite some time now, usually in irregular intervals. If you were to head down to any of the towns within the affected region for a visit, the chances of you noticing anything out of the ordinary would still be rather low. But then again, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's entirely possible you could witness an occurrence of SCP-3023, every arachnophobe's worst nightmare. One terrifying incident happened at a baseball game held during the height of the summer. With the scorching sun hanging high above a stadium packed with eager fans, the home team was neck and neck with their longtime rivals from the next town over. As the players
this
took to
one's
the field
dumb.
after a changeover, everything hung in the balance. The home team's coach had made a bold change, sending out a new baseman, a young man named Jenik Denke. He was a rookie. We've all heard of the Led Zeppelin song Stairway to Heaven, a title that invokes the image of a stairway leading up to a land of peace and paradise. But where else could a stairway lead? To a dusty attic full of old photo albums? To the upper level of a mall where the movie theater and frozen yogurt shop are neatly situated? Perhaps it leads to a rooftop with a beautiful view. Or maybe, just maybe, a staircase could lead you to SCP-2427. SCP-2427, appropriately nicknamed A Thing Full of Stuff, is an extra-dimensional area filled with a variety of unusual and anomalous objects. SCP-2427 can be accessed by way of a broken stone staircase located in rural Ohio. According to local legend, carrying a sprig of hemlock up the broken stairs will allow a person to emerge into a mysterious grass clearing that appears to be in a forest somewhere in the United States. No matter what time a person ascends the staircase, the solar time in the clearing will always be 2 p.m. You know how people say it's 5 o'clock somewhere? Well, it's 2 o'clock somewhere too, and that somewhere is here. The pocket dimension that is SCP-2427 is thought to have been a holding area for weapons, prisoners, and artifacts belonging to an ancient cult known as the Brazen Heart. Little is known about this relatively obscure cult, other than the fact that they worship the demonic entity Moloch, a known enthusiast of violent human sacrifice, and were previously thought to have been eradicated during the Spanish Inquisition. The existence of SCP-2427 suggests that they are very much not eradicated, and are still active. They refer to these holding areas as attics, and though no confirmed members of the Brazen Heart have been contacted, it is considered possible that there are at least a handful of other attics hidden around the world. The Foundation has identified 7 anomalous objects inside of SCP-2427 so far, each strange in its own beautiful, though often terrible way. Like snowflakes, if they were capable of killing or maiming you. The first object in SCP-2427, aka SCP-2427-1, is a seemingly normal fire hydrant. However, if you think there's anything normal about the items found here, then you haven't been paying attention. The hydrant is made out of lead, and when opened, it expels high levels of ionized radiation. No specific measurements of the radiation have been taken yet, but it is definitely hazardous to human health. One unfortunate member of D-Class personnel has proven that it is a high enough level to melt human flesh. Sorry about your face, Dave. The hydrant is currently contained within an electrified perimeter and is not to be opened under any circumstances to prevent any further flesh melting. The last thing we need is another Dave incident. The second object contained within SCP-2427 or SCP-2427-2 is not actually an object at all. It's a building. Only on number 2 and we're already throwing curveballs at you. Trust no one. Surprises lurk around every corner. This particular building resembles a large multi-storied sanitarium built in the 1860s, though it is clear from the outside that the building has or should have multiple stories. The inside is a different matter. Past the building's front doors is a non-Euclidean space consisting of a single floor and 3 sparsely decorated rooms with one central foyer. The first room is the holding place for SCP-2427-3. The second contains SCP-2427-4, and the third room contains nothing except scattered religious documents, bottled water, and a selection of canned food. No unauthorized staff are permitted to enter the building, in order to minimize complications or potential employee casualties. The first 2 anomalies on this list are hardly even strange by SCP Foundation's standards. Sure, the hydrant can melt your face, and the building defies the laws of physics and space, but that's just a regular Tuesday around these parts. Been there, seen that. What else you got? Well, SCP-2427-3 is where things really get strange. If you're wandering through the bowels of SCP-2427-2 and you make a wrong turn into the first room, you will find yourself face to face with a startling sight. This entity is a combination of electronic circuitry, a cow's digestive tract, the hairless head of a human man, a hat rack, several lengths of garden hose, and an unidentified crystalline structure. This creature is extraordinarily fast and strong, exhibiting carnivorous tendencies and a very strong point of view on the world around it. Lucky for us, it is capable of speech and is able to tell us just what it thinks. Though this monstrosity doesn't have much of a right to pass judgment on anyone, cow intestine, body and all, it has expressed a violent hatred of all life that it considers impure. Anyone who encounters SCP-2427-3 experiences an overwhelming desire to submit themselves for judgment, allowing the creature to determine their purity. There is a rumor that if one is judged to be pure, they will have a wish granted. If they are deemed impure, however, they will be devoured alive. If you're tempted to introduce yourself to the creature, your odds are not especially great. The creature has not encountered a single pure being yet. In order to protect the Foundation staff working in its vicinity, the entrance to SCP-2427-3's room has been sealed off with a reinforced steel door, and the windows have been paved over with concrete. Armed guards are watching the entrance at all times. The creature must be fed 1 live goat per day in order to keep its appetite satiated. The Foundation's goat budget is through the roof these days, but it's worth it to keep the thing contained. Better to spend money on goats now and not spend money on cannibalized personnel later. SCP-2427-4 consists not of an object located within a room, but the room itself. The room, which contains no furniture and a linoleum floor, has a peculiar effect on the human psyche. Once a person steps foot into the room,
I could win.
they lose
I could be
consciousness
just as
for
pure.
5 minutes. During this time,
get my
they will
wish.
speak freely,
I could.
listing off a
That
variety
thing
of
would look at me like,
qualities
damn, you're
about
pure. What wish you want, boy?
Once they wake up, they have no memory of entering this state or anything that they said during it. It's cheaper than therapy, right? But it's also much weirder and less effective, so you get what you pay for in the end. A member of D-Class personnel who was observed inside of the room waxed poetic about his personal failings, beginning his monologue with, "My soul is a den of spiders," and ending it with, "Oh, here whence I awaken, hesitate not to feed my flesh and my soul to the judge beast." Somebody give this guy a hug, because the room seems to have no adverse effects on human test subjects except for causing everyone who hears their monologue a bit of discomfort. There are no containment procedures in effect for it at this time. We've had rooms, fire hydrants, and horrible meat robot hybrids, and now you can't even trust the clouds in the sky. SCP-2427-5 is a seemingly innocent cloud, hovering stationary over the building. When looked at by a human for more than 3 seconds, the cloud will eject a ball of solid lead towards the person at a supersonic speed. That's right,
fucked
folks.
up.
This cloud can
That's
and
fucked up.
will shoot you. It hates being observed, but it also hates when you try to leave the perimeter. It will attack any person attempting to leave by firing the same lead ball at them. So far, 14 personnel have been killed by this highly aggressive cloud. and some people still think thunderstorms and hail are
That's
the worst
fucked up.
things clouds
That's
have to
crazy.
offer. So
That's a wild one. I like that.
As it is a literal cloud, there is no way to contain it, so no people in the vicinity of the cloud are permitted to look at it for more than 3 seconds at a time. SCP-2427-6 is a series of 18 small trees, spread throughout the instance of SCP-2427. Above ground, the trees look normal, though their species has proven surprisingly difficult to determine. From an external perspective, they are simply ordinary trees. However, radar analysis revealed that the roots of these trees are deeply strange. Instead of the usual twisting tree roots, the ground below these trees contains a mass in the shape of a human body. Much to the disgust of the observing researchers, these humanoid masses occasionally twitch and move, as if alive. The trees themselves appear to be growing from the crotch area of each humanoid figure. How's that for Morningwood? I know, I get it, bad joke. This arrangement between tree and person seems to be some kind of punishment, as each tree is marked with a plaque reading, "The lecherous suffer what they must, and it is beautiful." Until it can be certain that the condition of these human roots is not contagious, these trees are to be treated as potential biohazards and isolated in individual containers. The final object in SCP-2427 currently categorized by the Foundation is SCP-2427-7. SCP-2427-7 is a pile of ashes and wood located just behind a posted sign that reads, "The Liar's Cradle." Extensive testing has been established that the Liar's Cradle was almost certainly used as a torture device in interrogations performed by the Brazen Heart. A person standing within the boundaries of the cradle, which encompasses the aforementioned circle of wood and ashes, is unable to lie without suffering the consequences. Namely, they will be set on fire. The nature of how exactly the Liar's Cradle works is not certain, and more research needs to be done on it. However, this much is known for sure. It contains no sentient intelligence. It is not aware of what it is doing. It does not kill its victims, rather it keeps them miraculously alive as it sets them on fire, prolonging their agony and allowing their interrogators to get the truth out of them. A series of experiments revealed that it only immolates a person who is knowingly lying. D-Class personnel give demonstrably false information to repeat in the cradle without knowledge of its falsehood were not set on fire. However, when those same D-Class personnel knowingly lied in the boundaries, they immediately were set ablaze. It is almost certain that the Brazen Heart cult used the cradle as a method of interrogating presumed liars in their midst. Further investigation will likely reveal human remains beneath the cradle itself, though this is just a hypothesis currently. But come on, there has to be some bones somewhere beneath something as ominous as the Liar's Cradle. Though they have only identified 7 anomalies inside SCP-2427 at the moment, there are plenty more lurking in there, waiting to be discovered. In the foyer of SCP-2427-2, the Foundation discovered an extremely ominous list of items, clearly belonging to members of the Cult of the Brazen Heart. This list included some familiar items, such as Pilgrim Provisions, also known as the canned beans and soup found in SCP-2427-2, a Level 3 Purity Proctor, a Purge Engine, disguised as a fire hydrant, and the Liar's Cradle. However, it also contained many things that have not yet been discovered, such as 1 Slaughtering Perseverance, 27 Pyre Children, 3 Ascended Cultivars, 7 Supreme Angelics, 9 Dragons, and the Brazen Heart itself. Dr. Gordon McElroy, Site Director of Area 2427, put out a memo to all Level 4 and higher staff assigned to the area after the discovery of this list. Understandably, he was most concerned about the Supreme Angelics and the Dragons, particularly the latter. The cult, as most cults are, is fond of deliberately obscure language, but you don't want to rule out the possibility they've got a fire-breathing lizard or 2 stashed away. In the meantime, as the Foundation is working to better understand the contents of SCP-2427, the area has been sealed off to the public. A 500-meter perimeter has been established around its entrance, and a fake private country club has been set up as a front. It's only a matter of time before the rest of the anomalies on the list are discovered, and this thing full of stuff gets even fuller of even more stuff. Let's just hope none of it ever gets out. Because if there are more of these addicts out there, who knows what else the Brazen Heart is hiding? Their little cult may not be as extinct as we thought. A D-Class drag races through the testing zone, screaming at the top of his lungs and doing donuts. A mime who is also in the testing chamber stares with disapproval, tapping his foot impatiently. Did we mention that the car is made of spiders? Yeah, this one is going to be a weird one, folks. Stay tuned for one of the craziest SCP stories you've ever heard. Emily had always dreamed of taking a trip to Paris. When the opportunity actually came to visit the city, she was overjoyed. She spent her time exploring art museums, tasting the bread and cheese, and walking through the city streets, taking in the sights. One of her favorite things about Paris was all of the street performers. As she walked, nibbling on a pain au chocolat, she delighted in the antics of jugglers, tossing colorful balls into the air. She gasped at the feat of athleticism and grace demonstrated by acrobats and contortionists. She giggled at the absurd shows put on by puppeteers and dabbed tears from her eyes at the sound of beautiful songs played and sung by musicians. It became part of her daily routine. One night, as Emily was walking back to her hostel after a long, languid dinner, she found herself walking down a street she had not encountered before. There was no one around except for her. It was a lovely moment of peace, but it also struck her as a little bit eerie, and she wished for the familiar throngs of people. Up ahead, she spotted the silhouette of another person and let out a sigh of relief. As she got closer, she could make out the black and white striped shirt, the suspenders, the black beret, the white face makeup, rouged cheeks, and red lips. A mime. A real, classic French mime. She couldn't believe her luck. When he spotted Emily approaching, the mime began to start a performance. He began with a classic, The Invisible Box. He felt around the walls of the invisible box, looking out with exaggerated wide eyes and an open mouth. Emily clapped and reached into her bag for a little bit of money she could use to tip him. After all, he was putting on a performance just for her. He deserved it. She walked closer to the mime, looking for a place to put her tip. She didn't see one, so she held up her hand, offering the money directly to the mime. As he took notice of how close she was getting, the mime began shaking his head vigorously, eyes wide and insistent. She didn't understand that he was trying to warn her until it was too late. Dozens and dozens of spiders began to crawl over the mime's face, out from inside of his clothes, from his shoes, pouring out over the street, and crawling up onto Emily. She tried to brush them off, she tried to run away, but no matter how hard she tried, the spiders just kept coming. All she could do was scream. In an attempt to experience a little bit of life,
Reminds only take pretend money. That is true. They should take crypto.
SCP-3247. SCP-3247 is a humanoid entity standing at approximately 1.7 meters in height. It wears a striped shirt and suspenders similar to the garb of a stereotypical French mime, as well as what appears to be white makeup on its face and all other exposed skin. Though these aspects of its appearance seem as if they should be removable, the clothing and makeup are, in fact, parts of the entity's physiology and cannot be removed from its body. This is not the only unusual aspect of the entity's physical form. Though it looks corporeal and solid, the entity cannot touch or directly interact with any solid matter, with one particular exception. There is a colony of spiders living on and inside of SCP-3247. These spiders have officially been designated SCP-3247-A and are highly protective of SCP-3247. If anyone or anything attempts to approach SCP-3247 in a threatening manner, the spiders will swarm the potential threat. As any savvy, anomalous activity enthusiast might have already gathered, these are, of course, no ordinary spiders. Not only do they dwell on and in an intangible mime, but they have a peculiar response to witnessing a human being making specific gestures or pantomiming activities. When this occurs, the colony of spiders will form the shape of an object related to the gestures, which they will then hold for up to 3 hours, or until given additional stimuli that prompt a change in shape. While the spider colony is assembled into shape, they will be able to share some of the given object's functions in spite of being technically nothing more than a mass of well-coordinated arachnids. As for SCP-3247, It is either incapable of speech or unwilling to speak. Instead, it communicates with Foundation staff via silent miming. When it does, the spiders will frequently react to its gestures, becoming effectively living props. SCP-3247 does not seem to be especially thrilled with this, likely because miming is inherently a propless art form, and these spider-based props undermine its artistic vision.
Is he just
Otherwise,
pissed because
though,
the spiders
mind
keep
of
like
the
messing with
spiders does not seem
his
to
skit? That's
bother
great.
SCP-3247. In order to better understand the nature of SCP-3247-A, Foundation staff conducted a series of tests. In each test, a D-Class was given a gesture to perform in the presence of SCP-3247.
Oh, I don't want to see
Then,
this.
the research staff would record the spider colony's response. During the first test, the research staff ordered D-11424 to attempt to get as close to SCP-3247 as possible. They did not, of course, warn him about the spiders. He entered the testing chamber and approached the mime, who was pantomiming the act of climbing stairs. As the mime pretended to ascend an invisible staircase, and D-11424 grew closer, instances of SCP-3247-A emerged to take the shape of a staircase, much to the mime's frustration. SCP-3247 stopped its performance, throwing up its hands in a gesture of defeat. The spiders turned their attention to D-11424 and began to swarm him, treating him as a potential threat. Panicking and unsure how to communicate with SCP-3247 while the spiders were overpowering him, D-11424 began to wave frantically at the mime. The mime simply shrugged, giving him a look that said, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" At this point, Control intervened, instructing D-11424 to pantomime some kind of activity. Fortunately, before turning to a life of crime, D-11424 had spent several years in a professional improv troupe and was well acquainted with pantomime. His performing instincts kicked in, and he leapt into action. He put a hand to his ear as if listening to the ringing of a telephone. The spiders stopped their attack, responding immediately to his cue. They formed into the shape of a small table, with an old-fashioned rotary phone on top. The mime rolled its eyes in disdain at the sight of this prop-based performance, but D-11424 was on a roll. He crossed to the phone, picked up the receiver, and held it to his ear. "Hello?" he asked out of habit. He wasn't expecting to hear a voice on the other line, but then he did. Or rather, he heard the approximation of a human voice, created by a swarm of anomalous spiders. It sounded a bit like a human voice sped up, high-pitched, and squeaky, speaking some sort of gibberish. Realizing that this was his moment to escape, D-11424 placed the phone back in place and promptly left the testing chamber. The spiders remained in the shape of the rotary phone and the table for the next 2 hours, at which point they disassembled and returned
These spiders
to
just
their
seem
home
cool.
on SCP-3247. After his surprisingly creative work in this first test,
What's the issue with these
it was
spiders?
decided that D-11424 would be the designated test subject for all future testing with SCP-3247.
What's the issue with these spiders?
Provided that additional complications did not arise. Though he wasn't especially fond of spiders, D-11424 was more than happy to accept the assignment, not that he had much choice in the matter. Still, it was definitely a better deal than getting fed to SCP-682, and it was a nice excuse to use his improv skills again after a long retirement. During the second test, D-11424 knew what to expect from SCP-3247. For this test, he was told to pantomime playing tug-of-war with an invisible opponent and an invisible rope. Now that he knew his improvisational scene partner would be a colony of spiders, he was able to enter the testing chamber with confidence. Once inside, he began to pantomime, pulling on a rope, having that rope tugged away from him by a strong opponent, and struggling to pull back. The spiders reacted right away, arranging themselves into the shapes of a long rope, one side of which was in D-11424's hands, as well as a large humanoid, vaguely muscular in shape, that was holding the other side of the rope. The spiders gave the rope a sharp tug, causing D-11424 to lose his balance and fall over, the rope slipping out of his grasp. Aside from some injury to his
This seems like it'd be
pride,
such
he
a
was
cool
otherwise
superpower.
unharmed. During test number 3, D-11424 was instructed to enter the testing chamber and close his fist, while extending the thumb and index finger in a gesture colloquially known as finger guns. Sure enough, as soon as he assumed this position, the spiders assembled into the shape of a handgun. D-11424 was then instructed to pick up the spider gun and squeeze the place where the
Spider
trigger would be.
This is exactly
It
what I was
was a
thinking in my
real
head. It's like, can't you
and
just make a
not,
gun?
You know, spiders. A loud cracking sound
Can you,
was
like, shoot?
heard when the D-class squeezed as a spider shot out of the barrel of the gun at high speed before smacking into the nearby wall, leaving a small hole in the surface. D-11-424 fired several more times, each shot firing an individual spider at a pace that attending researchers described as faster than a speeding bullet. After firing 6 rounds of spiders at the wall, D-11-424 was instructed to place the spider gun back on the ground. During test number 76, D-11-424 was ordered to hold his hands together and wiggle 4 fingers on each hand, effectively pantomiming a spider. The research team was curious to see what the spiders would do when presented with a shape that matched their usual unassembled form. SCP-3247, who generally did not react much to the experiments on its spiders, began shaking its head in mild disappointment as approximately 640 spiders emerged from its body, dividing themselves into groups of 8. Each group of 8 spiders then joined to form one large spider, leaving 8 spiders. These 8 then split into pairs, who joined together into one larger spider, and so on and so forth until there was one single giant spider made from the hundreds of smaller spiders. At this point, D-11-424 followed his heart, jumping onto the mega spider's back and riding it like a bull at the rodeo, as the spider bucked and ran back and forth across the room. According to official transcripts, D-11-424 yelled "Yee-haw" throughout this part of the test.
What's the issue with the spiders?
To climb down from the spider and exit the room. He was reprimanded for his behavior and warned that if he acted without approval again, he would be taken off the project and reassigned to a much less enjoyable position as one of the designated eyes on SCP-173. D-11-424 immediately agreed to comply with future instructions. During test number 133, D-11-424 was sent into the testing chamber and told to shadowbox. He danced back and forth across the cell, doing his best Sylvester Stallone impression and throwing punches in the general direction of the spiders. In response, approximately 3,000 spiders poured out of SCP-3247, assembling into the shadowy shape of a boxer, and began to attack D-11-424. The mass of spiders conducted itself at the level of a professional boxer, dodging D-11-424's hits before coming back at him with a jab, cross, lead uppercut, and rear uppercut before he could defend himself. D-11-424 fell to the ground unconscious, and guards were forced to interrupt the test in order to remove him from the room and take him to the infirmary for medical treatment. After taking some time to recuperate,
there has to be something, right?
D-11-424 returned to testing with SCP-3247-A. He was instructed to mime steering a wheel, such as that of a car. Immediately, a number of spiders previously unseen during testing emerged from SCP-3247, arranging themselves into the shape of a sedan. D-11-424 was then commanded to climb inside of the spider car and see if he could start it. He refused, insisting, "I'm not getting in a spider car, are you nuts?" When pressed by Control to comply with orders, he made a rude hand gesture. I'll let you guess what that was. The spiders began to scramble to reassemble themselves in response to the changed gesture, prompting Control to stop the test early to spare the researchers' sensibilities. With strict guidelines to avoid inappropriate or violent gestures, D-11-424 was sent back into the testing chamber with instruction to try out a variety of animal-inspired gestures in rapid succession. He formed one hand into a fist and made a peace sign with the other hand, putting them together to make a snail. As he made his hand snail crawl through the air, the spiders crawled onto the floor and assembled into the shape of a snail in front of D-11.
Just so enthralled by this. Like, what's the downside of these spiders?
Scuttling pace, once they formed into the snail, they slowed to a gradual creep. D-11-424 noted
what's the issue?
Shiny, slimy trail left behind on the floor as the spider snail moved. He was asked to consider touching it, but refused, simply stating, "Ew, no." Next, he took his hands and formed the shape of a wolf's head, howling at the moon. The research staff were curious to see if the spiders would form a wolf's head or the animal's entire body. They got their answer as the spiders swarmed and shifted, forming the shape of a full-sized gray wolf. The wolf padded back and forth across the room before sitting down, lifting its head and emitting an audible howl that sounded almost indistinguishable from the real thing. Next, D-11-424 crossed his thumbs over each other, fluttering hands like a pair of wings. The spiders separated into smaller groups and came together to form butterflies similar in size to a monarch. These spider butterflies began to flap their wings and Much to D11424's surprise, they took flight and swirled through the air around him. The D-Class was so
What's the
moved
mime
by the
doing in
beautiful
all of this?
sight
Is he
that
like
shed
upset?
a single tear, which he promptly wiped away out of embarrassment. Control then prompted him to try the next animal gesture. D11424 used his hands to form the shape of a rabbit. Several of the spiders crawled away, returning to SCP-3247, and the remaining spiders took on the form of a rabbit.
You
The
get
spider
Bunny on
rabbit hopped
command.
realistically around the room, twitching its ears and tail. At this point, D11424 was instructed to offer the spider rabbit a carrot. He produced a carrot from his pocket, holding it out in front of him. The spider rabbit hopped over to him and, one crunch at a time, began to eat the carrot until none remained. D11424
Yeah, like, I don't know what the issue
appeared
is.
shaken
There
up
has to be
and
something
asked
fucked
to
up.
leave the testing chamber. As he followed all of his instructions, this request was granted. When he exited the chamber, all he would say was, "Where the hell did the carrot go? It doesn't have a stomach, it doesn't have a mouth. Where did it go?"
Where'd it go? Like, not nowhere to go. Like,
is kept
I'm
in an
just
isolated
confused.
chamber located in the arachnid wing of Area 12. It does not appear to require food or rest, but it has been provided with a television and a collection of silent films for morale purposes. Instances of SCP-3247-A are fed via a fully automated system that dispenses 20 grams of live crickets every week. Should a containment breach occur, staff have been instructed to find a way to make escaped spiders take on the shape that renders them motionless, then simply pick the spider cluster up and place it back inside of the cell. It is unlikely that the Foundation will ever get an explanation for where the intangible mime and his merry band of spider performers originated.
What's the what? Besides, like, don't get close to the guy. What the fuck is a motionless shape? Like a square, I guess. A square, but like, besides, like, don't get close to him and don't get in his personal space. What the fuck is the issue with that? Like, that just sounds like a fun little thing. It's like, oh damn, I want to play. You could, dude, you could literally just be like, hey, I need to buy this thing. Here's like 100. I'm gonna, mime out a fucking $2,000 bill or something, and you just pay for it, and then the spiders dissipate and come back to you. Right? They'll just come back to you because, like, I just don't understand what the downside of spiders are. What's the downside of it? Besides, like, you can't get near them. I don't think there is a downside to spider, dude. I think that is a good SCP. I just think that's the fucking SCP Foundation being pussies.
From. But one thing is clear. They won't be performing in public again anytime soon. Spiders. Spiders everywhere. Covering every inch of the containment site. Entombing, screaming.
Oh, the next one's good. It's called Communist Spiders.
The spider writhed around in pain, trying desperately to free itself from the silk threads that were pinning its 8 legs
Communist
down.
Spiders.
Agony coursed through its limbs as the venom slowly made its way towards its abdomen. All around it, a number of spiders chattered their pinchers angrily and jabbed and poked at its dying body.
I'll be right
The
back. You listen to
spider wasn't
Communist
sure how
Spiders
much
for a
more
moment.
pain it could
Chat.
endure before its body would give out. It had done wrong. It knew it had. The spider had fallen short of the manifesto, of the party guidelines, and of the ideals of the fearless leader. It had communicated with the outside world without permission, so it would be tortured, and it would die. The spider just hoped that its death would come sooner rather than later, as the venom burned at each of its limbs. Then, all of a sudden, the crowd of spiders around it parted, and the whole web itself began to shake with heavy footsteps. A colossal spider with gray markings across its back towered over the others as it stalked along the web towards the dying spider. The spider closed its eyes as its fearless leader spread its mandibles wide and lunged forward. And from a couple feet above, with tears in his eyes, researcher Simon Parker scribbled furious notes into his notepad. He was sitting alone in the forest, surrounded by spider webs, with thousands of tiny spiders and 8 times as many legs crawling up, down, in, and out of every tree, web, and clump of moss in the clearing. It had taken him months to build up this level of trust with the arachnids. For the longest time, none of them had trusted him. In fact, many of them had wanted him dead. There had been numerous assassination attempts as he had conducted his research, but fortunately for him, most of the spiders in the colony were not particularly venomous to humans. That was, until recently. Professor Parker had a mole on the inside.
Dude, you could tell the spiders
You could pantomime Jeff Bezos and then have them enter his bank account information, and you get money from Jeff Bezos.
The ideals of those around it. The spider had informed him just earlier that day that the arachnids in the colony had made a deadly breakthrough in their KGB equivalent unit, a toxin so powerful it could kill the man in one bite. This was all very fascinating for Professor Parker, who watched as his informant was tortured and eaten right in front of him. It was only once he wrote the closing line in his notepad that he stopped and wondered exactly where was this hyper-venomous spider. He looked up just in time. A spider with terribly long legs and shiny purple markings on his back swung towards him, fangs spitting with venom. He ducked, but the spider caught in his hair and got tangled. Professor Parker leaped to his feet and sprinted out of the clearing, putting his knees through a number of newly made spider webs as he went. He ran his hands through his hair, flicking and shaking in the hopes that the spider had fallen loose. He wasn't proud to be screaming like a girl all the way out of the clearing. A couple of his colleagues poked their heads out of the nearby research lab as he approached. Embarrassment got the better of him as he slowed to a walk and gave them a courteous wave. He couldn't feel the spider anywhere on his head anymore. He must have gotten away with it. That was a close one. Professor Parker went to wipe the sweat away from his brow, but as he raised his hand, he saw a tiny black spider clinging onto it. He had time to let out one pathetic squeak of surprise before the arachnid plunged its fangs into his skin and killed him on the spot. SCP-1006 refers to a spider colony located in an undisclosed national park in the United States of America. The spiders within this colony vary in species and size, but are united by one shared goal: to promote and uphold the values of Marxism. This colony was discovered by
They are legitimately just communist
traveling
spiders.
through the national park on summer break.
It's just spiders that practice communism.
One of the hikers noticed
I love
a
that.
rather complex and extensive network
Scoots,
of
this is for you.
webs hanging between some trees. The closer the hiker looked, however, the more that they realized that this was not a normal spider colony. There were species of spiders here that one would never normally see roaming free in the US. What was more, there seemed to be something like writing hanging on the webs. But surely that couldn't be. The hiker leaned in close and tried their best to read what was being said. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. Fortunately, the hiker and all of their friends thought that the writing in the web was some kind of prank being played by the national park. Maybe even a very early Halloween display. Within a week, the SCP Foundation had arrived and cordoned off the area, immediately surrounding the webbing under the guise of conservation work. Investigations began right away into the exact nature and origins of this communist group of spiders, and the results were fascinating. Not only were their writings resembling Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, but there were also a number of webs that had been spun to resemble the faces of various park rangers who would have been patrolling the area. Closer inspection revealed the existence of a number of rudimentary tools, such as twigs with pebbles tied to the tips using silk webbing, fallen branches surrounding the central web, many of which seemed to show the markings of tiny axe cuts where they had been split from the tree. Several weeks of close observation confirmed that the spiders were indeed creating tiny axes to cut down branches under the guise of protecting the central web. This was the first evidence of the spiders' hostility towards the human race. Not only did the spiders write about the virtues of communism, but they also seemed intent on putting it into practice. SCP-1006 is one of only 5 remaining Marxist-Leninist states in the world, along with China, Cuba, Laos, and Vietnam. Although, admittedly, the spiders' version of communism is very primitive. Individual spiders have different roles within the community, each with the intention of serving the group as a whole. Some have the responsibility of maintaining and fixing any holes within the web, whilst others are given the responsibility of expanding into new territory. Some spiders catch flies.
Are they considering
Other spiders wrap
a
them
mass
and
of
prepare them
spiders
for consumption.
its own
And
state?
most interestingly, another group separates the flies' bodies into individual meal portions and allocates an equal amount of food to every spider within the community. Beyond that, the spiders admittedly do very little. They are spiders, after all. One bright researcher by the name of Simon Parker had the idea one day to hand the spiders a piece of paper and a small pen, like the kind you find in a bank at the tip of a little chain. Immediately, the spiders gathered around the pen and did their best to coordinate lifting it and dragging it around the paper. Simon Parker leaned in, excited to have his first communication with another species, but it quickly became apparent that the spiders were less than excited to talk to him. Bourgeoisie pig. Charming. Day after day, Simon Parker would sit with the spiders and do his best to understand what exactly it was they wanted. He wasn't sure whether they were incredibly idealistic or simply had a completely false idea of how powerful he was. "What would you like to do today?" he would ask them. "Dismantle Western imperialism with immediate effect before redistributing wealth equally to the masses." Right. I can't do much to help with that. It was difficult to have a conversation with them. They were hyperfixated on their goal and had little time to talk about niceties or more pertinent topics like where they had come from. The answer to that question remains a mystery, although there could be some evidence still to find from the body at the center of the web. It was Professor Parker who discovered the body. His regular visits to the web, bringing sheets of paper with him, had drawn the attention of a spider who lived right in the heart of it all, one known as the Fearless Leader. A group of spiders led Professor Parker through the trees towards his palace in the middle. Professor Parker had to duck and crawl under a number of dense webs. It didn't take a genius to work out that he was getting closer and closer to the origins of this colony. Web Zero, as it were. Out of a gap in a tree, an enormous wolf spider crawled out to meet him. It was hairy and gray, with strong legs and a slumping abdomen. Meekly, Professor Parker offered out the sheet of paper and pen to the Fearless Leader. "You're not welcome here. We are the proletariat, united in our goals. Our foreign ways and corporate greed." Professor Parker tried his best to explain that he was actually boycotting Nestle and had done a number of papers on the virtues of communism while at university. However, he did have to admit that he had invested fairly heavily in the stock exchange. The Fearless Leader bore its fangs at those words and stomped angrily, making its webs sway and buckle underneath. "We spiders do what we must to protect our commune. You are not welcome." It was at that point that Professor Parker saw the body for the first time. It was at his feet.
The spider has a Russian
dry,
accent,
past the point
sure.
of smelling particularly putrid. Around the body were a number of small coins, bottle caps, and other shiny objects. It must have been the wolf spider's haul of wealth and riches. So much for equality for all. "Did you kill this man?" Professor Parker asked, suddenly feeling his blood running a little cold. Was that a set of 8 legs tickling the back of his neck? "Our actions are our own. Leave." But as Professor Parker walked away, he was fairly certain he had his answer already. The back of the man's head looked to have been caved in by some kind of blunt force impact, not something these spiders would be able to do on their own. Was that where their colony had first started? As soon as Professor Parker reported his findings to the Foundation, they launched a careful search of the surrounding area for any clues as to the man's identity, and within the hour, they were in luck. A wallet. There wasn't much inside. A couple of quarters, an old receipt so faded it couldn't provide much information, but by some miracle, there was still a driver's license. A match came back right away on the Foundation's database. He was a known political radical, expelled from a number of universities and fringe political groups for being a bit too much. Police reports pegged him as having gone missing in the small town in Texas in 1976. That date seemed to match up pretty well with the state of decomposition on the body. Investigations are still ongoing into the exact nature of this man's disappearance and what connections he had, if any, to the world of arachnology. It was far too coincidental that a group of spiders capable of communication and spouting extreme political rhetoric had just happened to create a colony on top of his corpse. But try as Professor Parker might, he couldn't get any information out of the spiders about the body. In a godless society, it was evident that their political views barred them from giving the corpse spiritual status. But when they talked about the body, it was evidently as close to a religious site as they were capable of conceding. Only one spider seemed to open up to Professor Parker. The spider had followed him out of the colony one evening after a long and fruitless day arguing about the benefits of privatizing certain industries. It swung down in front of him from a tree and waved him down right on the edge of the spider's territory. Professor Parker soon discovered that this spider was a worker spider, responsible for expanding the web little by little each day until it encompassed the whole world. Initially, the spider was just curious as to how long that would take, as in the previous 40 or so years, they had expanded by about 200 meters. The fearless leader apparently believed that the circumference of the world couldn't be much more than 500 meters, so they would soon be in possession of more than half of the available land. Laughing, Professor Parker gently explained that it would take a good while longer before humanity felt particularly worried.
Literally
Much to his
just
surprise,
the
spider
downfall of
said
Russia is what these spiders are
evidently torn
going through.
as to what to say. The spider looked from him to the colony and back before writing down its next sentence on the paper. Screw Marxism. I just want to try a cheeseburger. That was the start of a peculiar kind of friendship between the pair. Every day, the spider would catch him on his way out and feed him whatever bits of information it had been privy to on the inside. That was no small task. The spiders had instituted a secret police, similar in hierarchy.
The spiders have secret police.
Which kept tight control over the spread of information within the web. Professor Parker learned that the oldest spiders in the web had vague memories of being hatchlings in a bright white room, of being shaken around and transported somewhere, of sharp needles being injected into eggs, of booming litter.
Are they saying that they got injected with pure communism? Are they about to tell me right now that these spiders, these little spiders, were injected with pure communism? Pure unadulterated communism? I'm invested pretty far now.
Literature being read out on repeat, so loud it would shake the webs beneath their feet. Then chaos and fear. Then freedom. Professor Parker got a number of small welts on his body over the next few weeks. Little tiny bite marks from various harmless spiders. The worst that ever happened was he felt a slight itch for an hour or two before it would go down, and his skin would patch up the tiny bite marks. He would laugh about these bites with his spider friend as he brought him little scraps of McDonald's burgers to sample. But the spider was gravely serious as he chowed down on his minuscule mouthfuls of beef. Those bites are getting stronger. Rumor is that they're developing an ultravenom.
The spiders have developed WMD. Gotta alert the U.S. government. They got oil in that there forest we got down. They got WMDs. What is Spider Osama in there? Is there Spider Osama in that web? Do we need to take him down too? We gotta send in the American spiders. We'll take them down clean.
Something that could take down a human. Fearless leader is being humiliated by a human walking into his territory every day and knowing that he is powerless to stop it. One day, that will change. And one day, it did. Professor Parker lay on the grass with foam dribbling out of his mouth, knowing that he was about to die. His small spider companion, the friend that he had spent weeks getting to know, had been tortured and killed because of him. And now, it was his turn. All he could do was raise his arm limply and stare at the tiny arachnid clinging to it, the one whose teeth had plunged into his skin and killed him, the one who had been laid out on the web and tortured, the one whom he thought had been his friend. The spider hopped down and pulled a pen from Professor Parker's jacket pocket and wrote one last message on the back of his hand. Long live Marxism. Long live the spider proletariat. Death to our enemies. Somehow.
Death to the enemies, Phil.
That was good. That one was good. Holy shit. Holy shit. I think that's a good one to end on. Wow. That one was good. That one, I like that one. I like spider communists. Long live glory, greatest spider web. Well, glory, greatest spider web. United States of Soviet Russia. Instead of that, it's the United States of Soviet spiders. Anyways, thank you all for watching. If you guys enjoyed the content, I know the writing streams are a lot quiet and just me writing, typing, and commenting on the videos we're listening to. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Please drop a follow or subscription or whatever. It helps a lot, and I'll catch you guys on the flip. Adios.